The pressure gauge did not lie. The chamber was a tomb for all but the strongest. Most recruits break in seconds, but she didn't even look up. The elite squad stood waiting for the crush, their armor shimmering under the sterile lights. I watched them from the console, my dorsal scales flushed a pale, agitated violet. This was the gravity well, a Class 8 gravity chamber. 50 of the Coalition's finest stood inside, their muscles taut, their minds focused on the coming threshold. "The gauge will hold," I muttered to the empty room. "Gravity doesn't negotiate." I punched the sequence into the main board. The air inside the chamber turned into a physical weight. The recruits hit the floor in a chorus of rhythmic, wet thuds. 49 soldiers lay sprawled, struggling to pull in a single breath, but one remained upright. Elara Vance stood near the center support beam. She was small, unassuming, and currently tapping at a datapad. She didn't look bothered. She didn't look like she was undergoing a lethal test. She looked like she was waiting for a bus. "Recruit Vance," I barked into the intercom. My mandibles clicked in confusion. "Status." She didn't glance at the camera. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a red fruit. She bit into it with a sound like snapping dry kindling. The scent of the apple hit the room's air filters, sweet, crisp, and completely alien to this metallic graveyard. "A bit heavy, sir," she said, her voice steady. "Tastes good, though." "Want a slice?" 50 cadets had collapsed. One continued her mid-morning meal. My scales pulsed with a sharp, heat-sensitive red. This wasn't a biological anomaly. It was an insult. I had spent 400 years perfecting the standards of the Coalition. I had seen warriors from 600 worlds fold under these settings. I was not going to be outclassed by a girl eating a snack in a gravity well. I slammed my hand onto the emergency override and twisted the dial to the breaker setting, 9.5 G. The structural stabilizers groaned. The entire facility vibrated as the gravity load intensified. At 9.5 G, the human skeletal structure should have been failing. The laws of physics dictated that a creature of her size should have been crushed into a pulp against the deck plates. But Elara just leaned back against the support beam. She finished the bite of fruit, chewed and swallowed. She reached into her pocket again, pulled out a napkin, and carefully wiped a drop of juice from her lip. She wasn't holding the beam to stand. She was holding it for balance while she checked her datapad. I stared at the readout. 4,000 system errors blinked in unison. The machine thought it was broken. It couldn't fathom that a target it was pressing with 9.5 G of force was standing there, bored. The sheer defiance of it was physical. I could feel the arrogance of my own design crumbling. The room hit the end of the timed cycle. The hum of the stabilizers cut out, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Elara walked to the exit, tossing the apple core into the waste bin. It landed with a soft, hollow thud. "Thanks for the workout, Chief. Need me to help with the cleanup?" I didn't answer. I watched her leave, my violet scales cooling to a dull, bruised gray. I opened the archive folder on my desk and pulled up the doctrine manual. I deleted the section on human biological limits. I started a new file, and I named it with a single, trembling word: unknown. The core sat on the console like a tombstone for our science. Some giants sleep with their eyes open. She was merely resting. Strength that chooses to be quiet is not the absence of power. It is the mastery of it. I realized then that we had been training recruits for a war we understood, while the humans were clearly built for a version of the galaxy we had not yet even begun to fear. I looked at the empty chamber, then back at my own hands. My scales remained a pale, lifeless gray, a reminder that the old order had ended with the crunch of a single piece of fruit. I would not be the proctor who failed to report this. I would be the proctor who documented the end of an era. The doctrine was dead, and humanity was the architect of its demise, even if they were too busy snacking to realize they had rewritten the laws of the universe. I pressed the transmit button, sending the encrypted files directly to the high command. I didn't add a summary. I didn't add a recommendation. I simply attached the data log and walked out of the observation deck. The gravity well felt different now, less like a tool of measurement and more like a warning. The future was not ours to command, and for the first time in centuries, I felt a cold, sharp thrill of genuine fear. I went to the mess hall to find a drink, knowing that tomorrow the reports would start arriving, and the coalition would find that the universe had grown much, much smaller. I sat alone at the edge of the hall, watching the stars drift past the observation port. They seemed different now, cold, distant, and indifferent to our panic. We had built a hierarchy based on the assumption that gravity was the ultimate arbiter of worth. We were wrong. Somewhere out there, on a world we hadn't bothered to map, there was a garden where things grew under pressure that would make our strongest engines scream. And if this girl was just a recruit, what were their veterans? What were their generals? I poured the drink into my intake vent, the liquid bitter and unrefined. I stared at the reflection in the glass, seeing the cracks in my own armor. The silence of the hall was heavy, not with gravity, but with the weight of impending change. I closed my eyes, and for the first time I didn't see the numbers of our expansion. I saw a girl, a red apple, and the quiet, crushing reality that we were no longer the masters of the dark. The war was coming, and I had already seen the outcome. I didn't need a sensor reading to tell me. The Apple core had said it all. The era of the coalition was coming to an end, and it would happen while we were still trying to explain why we had lost. The reports would be filed, the meetings would be held, but the truth would remain the same. The universe was no longer a place where we could dictate the terms of survival. We had spent our lives climbing toward the light, only to realize that the creatures from the deepest dark had already reached the summit and were simply waiting for us to catch up. The lights in the hall dimmed as the sector shifted into sleep mode. I didn't move. I stayed in the dark, listening to the hum of the ship, which now sounded like a frantic heartbeat. I thought about the other training sites, the other sectors, and the billions of citizens who still believed that their status was protected by the laws of nature. They would wake up tomorrow and carry on as if nothing had happened. They would train, they would fight, and they would die, all while believing in a hierarchy that had been shattered in a room measuring 9.5 GS. I had the power to warn them, to tear down the illusion, but I knew the truth. It wouldn't matter. You cannot teach someone to fear a monster they have decided does not exist. I finished my drink and stood up, my joints clicking in the silence. The corridors of the academy were empty, a hollow monument to a philosophy that had survived for ages and crumbled in an afternoon. I walked past the lockers, past the training rooms, and past the icons of our history, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Everything I knew was now a footnote, a minor detail in the history of a species that didn't even consider us a threat. I reached my quarters and locked the door, the sound of the bolt sliding home, providing a small, desperate sense of control. I looked at my reflection one last time before I turned off the light. The violet scales were gone, replaced by a dull, mottled ash. I was a relic of a time before the truth, a proctor of a test that no longer measured what it needed to. I laid down on the cot, but sleep was a distant prospect. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if the humans were already laughing at us, or if they were simply ignoring us, like we were nothing more than a passing breeze. Either way, the galaxy was different now. The rules had changed, and the silence in my quarters was the loudest sound I had ever heard.